Hey everyone, it's MK. Welcome back to MK Quilts and this week's installment of Tip of the Week. So what's happening in my studio this week is what happens most of the time when I come up with these ideas for Tip of the Week. I've got a quilt on the frame. I'm doing some techniques as I go through this stitch out, and I started to think, well, why don't I just make this a tip of the week and share what I'm doing with you? So what I've got on the frame this week is a beautiful double wedding ring quilt, and it's a quilt of my own. Now, if you're watching this video during the week of the first week in April 2019, then simultaneously I have a stitch along going on in my business page, on my business Facebook page. So if you want, after watching this video, head on over to MK Quilt's business Facebook page and watch as I take you through this entire stitch out, from the thought process of the layout, choosing the designs, to some of the other techniques that I'm using on this stitch out. But back to what we're going to cover this week. What I want to show you this week is how I am dealing with my block to block placement. This is a huge quilt. It's like about 101 by 101. And I've got a lot of blocks. I've got a lot of melon shapes. I've got a lot of cornerstones, which generally means that I am going to have to open and close every single block that I want to stitch. Open it, position, skew it, rotate it, resize it, whatever I'm going to do. Baseline save it, stitch it, move on to the next block, and do that whole process over again. Unless you use a duplication trick, a grouping trick, and save your workspace. It's going to just shave off a little bit of time in this whole block to block placement. So I'm going to turn the camera around. I'm going to show you these steps as best as I can with one hand on the camera and one hand on the machine, and then I will take you into simulation and explain the whole deal. All right, let's turn the camera around and let's do some block to block, duplication, and grouping. All right, so here is the quilt. It is a big, beautiful double wedding ring, and it's one that I finished, gosh, many years ago. It's also one that I teach as a piecing class. I am talking about all of that over in the stitch along on my business page. But let's get going and talk about how I am going to approach all of these individual blocks that I'm going to have to stitch out. Now, before I scan up onto the screen, I just want to show you that I still have my square foot on. And the square foot was tip of the week from last week. Now, I'm using it here on the double wedding ring because I have a straight finish on this quilt, which means I'm dropping a border design over here. So just as we explained in the tip of the week last time, I'm using that square foot and running that right along the edge of my quilt so that ultimately my binding won't cover up my stitching. I'm hoping to just be able to leave that foot on for the whole entire stitch out. I might have to swap it out to the glide foot while I'm working here in the middle, but we're going to try it. First thing is I'm going to go ahead and open up the block that I'm using. Here is the actual block. It is a block from Wasatch Quilting. It's part of a set. However, I did not buy the whole set. I just bought the block and the matching melon shape. So let's go ahead and open up the block. Now there's one block. All I'm going to do, and I know you can't see this necessarily, but I'm grabbing my machine and I'm coming down to my very first block down here on the end. Now, rather than placing that block and skewing that block and stitching that block and saving it and then moving on and doing the exact same thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a position, a loose position on this block over here, and then I'm going to duplicate and position loosely every single block all the way down. Simultaneously, I'm going to do the same thing with the melon block. so that ultimately I'm going to end up having a whole bunch of blocks open on my screen, and when I go through to stitch them, I'm just going to grab them one at a time and make the stitching happen. So let me do a couple here on the screen so you can see, and then I'll do the rest off camera so that I can use both hands, and then we'll talk a little bit about stitching, and then I'll take you into simulation. So I've got one block open, I've got my machine loosely in position. I'm going to do a modify reposition, and I'm just going to use the centering button right there, and I'll refresh. Now this block is going to be really nicely skewed into position, so I don't have to do anything with the resizing of this block at all. All I'm going to do is grab my machine. I'm going to come down to the next block on my quilt. So really quickly, there's the next block on my quilt. I'm loosely positioned in the middle. I'm going to hit the follow button so you can see that now there's where my crosshairs are because I've moved down, and I'm just going to hit the duplicate button. Now in this particular block, the start and stop point is out there on the corner of the block. So really quickly, I'm still in my modify reposition screen over here. I'm just going to go ahead and hit the center button so that that block kind of hangs out more loosely centered where I need it. It's not exact because I am going to skew it, but it's a little closer to it where it really belongs instead of positioning on the start point there. Okay, I'm grabbing my machine again. Down here, my follow button is still engaged. I'm still in my reposition screen. The other block is still selected, so I'm just going to go duplicate, and then I'm going to do center. And I'm going to do that all the way along this quilt. So let me go ahead and put the camera down. I will do that. I'll meet you right back here. All right, so I have 8 blocks along the width of this quilt. I did that duplicate center, duplicate center, duplicate center all the way along. So there are my 8 blocks loosely positioned where they need to be. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing with the melon shape. So let me go ahead and get that opened up. And there's the actual block. But here is a melon shape that I know is a little bit truer to the size that it needs to be. I figured that out on a previous row. So I'm just going to go ahead now. I've got the one open that's really the truer size. Again, I'm moving my machine into position over here on the melon shape on the end. The design is open. My machine's in position. I'm just going to do my modify, reposition, and I'm going to go ahead and center it. Now you're going to notice, just like the other blocks, the start and stop point on this block is at the top. Okay, sorry about the lost focus there. So I'm going to go backwards in the other direction. So here I am at my next melon shape. That first block is still open. I'm going to go ahead and do my duplicate, and instead of letting it hang down there a little bit lower than everything else, I'm just going to go ahead and center it. I really wouldn't have to do that centering step, but you know what, it's just takes a couple of seconds. So I've moved my machine again to the next melon, do the duplicate, and do the center. Okay, once again, let me do that down the rest of the quilt, and I'll meet you right back here. All right, so there we go. I came all the way down, hitting every single melon with my duplicate center. Now, up on the screen, we have all 8 blocks and all 9 melon shapes. Now, they're just loosely placed, aren't they? So I'm still going to have to go along one by one, block by block, and make sure that they're precisely positioned. But at least now they're all open. Okay, so let me get started with doing my marking and all of that here at the quilt, and I will show you a little bit of the stitching process of that happening, but I'll show you the rest of this in simulation. Well, I decided to show you a little bit more here at the quilt. So I came down towards the middle of the quilt so I can start from the center and work outward. I did my first set of marking. All it's going to take on these blocks is 4 marks. Let me go ahead and zoom to area so that you can see. There's my area. It's a little bit wonky. Here's my block that I had already opened and loosely positioned. I'm going to do my modify. I'm going to go under skew, and I'm just going to come on over here and do skew 2. And there it is, perfectly now positioned in that block. I'm going to go ahead and baseline. Now the next thing I'm going to do is a little bit different than the way that I teach generally. If you've taken any of my classes or rented any of my videos, you know that I do a lot of saving of individual blocks. And if you notice, if I do design open, you'll notice that my first row of blocks, I did that way. I saved every single block individually. Now, I had done the grouping, and I had done all of that I had just showed you. But when I went to save them, I saved them all individually. This time, I'm going to do something slightly different. I've got all of my blocks open. There's the one that I'm currently working on. That one currently got baselined. Instead of saving that block individually, let's save it as part of this workspace. So I'm going to do a save. I'm going to do a save of the workspace. I'm going to give this a name, and I'm actually going to put the phone down for a second, you guys, so that I can type a little bit smoothly. Be right back. Just so that you can see what I named my workspace, under File, I'm going to open up my workspace, and there is block and vertical melon row number 2. Okay, now I saved it as a workspace, not as in an individual block. But here's the thing. Every time I go along and choose one of these other blocks and do its individual placement or skewing or rotation, whatever I'm going to do, I'm still going to have to go back and save the workspace. Now, when I say I'm going to have to do that, I am choosing to do that, okay? And as you know, if you've taken any of my instruction, I am a saver. I like to save a lot. All of these blocks, especially the inner blocks, those are all going to be skewed. And if I find that when this quilt is done, I have a problem on one of these blocks that I need to fix, then I need to be able to get back to this workspace and pick this block, which is block number 7, okay? If I don't save it, either individual blocks or save my workspace, then I'm going to have a pretty hard time pulling up a skewed block and getting it to fit with the little part of it that I might have to restitch. Okay, so that's just my methodology. That's just the way that I puzzle through it and think about saving. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get stitching. I promised to show you a little bit in simulation, but hopefully you're following along on the stitch along as well. Even if you catch this video much later down the road, you can still head on over to MK Quilt's business page. I'll go ahead and leave that stitch along video up there, and I think this quilt is going to be spectacular. Okay, I'm going to get stitching. I'm going to meet you in simulation, and thank you for joining me this week on Tip of the Week. All right, everyone, here we go in simulation where I can show you things a little bit more up close and personal. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is the line drawing of the quilt that I'm working on. I'll just take this opportunity to remind everyone that I have an entire class on building line drawings. You can get to that on my website, mkquilts.com, under the video training tab. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close this, and I'm going to open up a portion of what I've already stitched out. All right, so as with most of my simulation videos, you need to do a little bit of imagining. You need to imagine that you're standing at your quilt, as I was, and that we had already done all of the stitching up to this row right here. Let's go ahead and open up our block. This is the Wasatch double wedding ring block that I was using. What you're going to do at your machine is you're going to grab your handlebars and come down into the first block. You're going to do Modify, Reposition, Reposition on Center. Now at the machine I usually use the follow button. The follow button doesn't work exactly the same in simulation, so I'm not going to be using it right now. Just know that when I was actually at my quilt, I depressed the follow button so that as I moved my machine down through each one of these blocks, I could see exactly where I was going, and the patterns followed along with me. Okay, so you take your machine, you move it down to the next block. This block is still selected, so when we hit duplicate, it duplicates that block. But remember I said that it duplicated it using the start point, and I wanted it to be more loosely centered. So because I was still in the Modify Reposition screen, I just hit center. And I did that all the way along that row. Duplicate, center. Duplicate, center. So let me finish that up for you. All right, now that I was down here with my machine down at the right-hand side of my quilt, rather than walk all the way back over to the left-hand side to start doing my duplication, I just went ahead and started over here on the right-hand side. Open up that little melon pattern. There's my melon master. And just remember in the video I explained to you that I placed one melon at the top of my quilt, did some resizing until I got the melon to be very close to the actual size it needed to be, and then I saved myself one master melon so that I could just use that over and over again throughout the entire quilt. All right, there's the melon. I just need to move my machine into position, do my modify reposition, reposition on center. Then again with the follow button on, which I'm not using here, I would just move over to this one, do duplicate, and then modify reposition center. Again, move the machine, duplicate, center. Let me finish that for you. And there's the last one. Now in the video, what I think I did was take my machine and come over to the middle and start on one of these blocks over here in the middle. You can really decide to start on the end if you want to. I just decided to kind of work from the center, working outward. All right, so brought my machine over here, went into the area tab, and started doing my multi-point marking. And let me just turn my area feature on so that you can see the area. There we go. And in simulation, you guys, I'm just trying to get these marks as close as I can. Obviously, at my quilt, I was using my square foot. We talked about that. I was using the little hole in the center of the square foot to get myself precisely positioned inside of these tips of the wedding ring arcs. Okay, after doing the 4-point marks, the multi-point marks, I'm just going to come over here on my workspace and select the block. Now about that, you guys, in simulation, and because I'm working with a very intense line drawing, sometimes it's hard to pick the block that you want. So it's much easier to go over onto the workspace tab to pick the block when you're in simulation. When I was at my quilt, I was using the follow button, right? And I was right on top of that block. So all I had to do with my finger on my tablet at the machine was select the block by clicking the screen. That doesn't work in simulation, so that's why I did it this way. Either way will work. Either way is acceptable when you're at your machine. It's just that at the machine, it's easier to use your tablet. In simulation, it's easier to use the workspace. Okay, we've got our block selected. We just did a modify skew, skew to. It skewed it perfectly into position. Then I baselined. And then rather than deciding to save each and every one of these blocks individually, I saved the workspace. So File, Save, Save Workspace. Now, all of these workspaces that are already saved, this is my actual subdirectory. So yours might not have this many files in it already, but how I have been naming my rows is like here's my block and vertical melon row 4. So I'm just going to select that workspace, and just so that I don't override it because I'm still working on this quilt, I'm just going to call this tip of week so that I know that this is just a dummy subdirectory or a dummy workspace name rather. Okay, so I'm just going to save that. Then I went ahead and stitched out this block. On my quilt, I decided not to do any tie-offs, and I was burying all my threads. Okay, so we're not going to watch this whole block stitch out, but just understand that at my quilt, clearly that would have been stitched out. All right, I'm just going to hit stop. Then what I did was I started working out from the center, stitching one block on the left, one block on the right. All right, so I moved my machine over here, again depressing the follow button. I'm not going to do that right now. I went ahead, cleared my area, and then start it over by marking my area for this block. And we'll do one more block real quick and save the workspace one more time. And then you'll just understand that I did what I'm about to show you. I did that every single time I went and placed one of these blocks or one of the melon points. Okay, so did my multi-point mark. I need to select my block. It's easier for me to do that over here. I did modify skew, skew to baseline. Now I need to go ahead and save again because I have skewed that block. So file, save. I'm going to save the workspace, and I'm going to start saving the workspace right over the top of what I've already selected, so that as I go along, every single block that gets skewed individually will be saved on that workspace in that manner. And that just makes it so that if I need to go back to any one of these blocks when it's time for me to take the quilt off the frame, if I have a little something that happened in my bobbin on that block, I can go back to that specific block in the workspace that I saved, pull up the entire workspace, which at that point is going to have all of those blocks saved in it. I'm going to go to that block. I'm going to reposition that block, and I'm going to restitch anything that I needed to restitch. Now, one thing to note about these little melon shapes, the melon shapes are not able to be skewed. So that was one of the reasons why I got the melon shape very close to the actual size that I needed it. So as I'm stitching the melon shapes, all I'm doing is 4 marks. I'm doing a mark here, a mark over here, a mark down here, and a mark over here. Again, if you're at your quilt, you can just select the block right on your screen. I'm not, so I'm going to go ahead and select, there we go. And then I did a modify align instead of skew, because skew doesn't work. Let me just show you, skew doesn't work. So I'm just doing modify align, and I'm aligning it to the center. I'm just zooming to my area, and if I need to do any resizing or rotating, I'm doing that each time I place the melon. Okay, so it is a little bit of work on a quilt like this, but it's going to be so stunning afterwards that it's really worth every single time I'm multi-point marking. Every single melon gets placed and positioned individually. Every single melon block and large block in this entire quilt is having all of their threads buried. Yes, it's a lot of work, but I think in the end you will see that the result is stunning. So you're going to have to watch for a while longer. This quilt is going to take me a while to finish up on my frame. I've got some traveling and some teaching to do. So it'll be a while, but of course when I'm all done, I will share the entire quilt with you. And just watch all the way to the end of this video. I will drop the names of all of the patterns that I have used in this quilt. All right, you guys, that's just a little tip of the week. I hope it was helpful. As always, thanks for being a follower. Thanks for all of your business. And until next time, from my studio to yours, happy quilting. Bye-bye.